Yeah, Lakshmi, should we start?
Yeah, we can start, sir.
Yeah.
So, as I had mentioned earlier, in this section, we'll be going through, I'll be walking you through one smart contract. It's a very simple smart contract and it's a smart contract that is available. So, what I will be doing is on the chat, I will put up the GitHub link. You can clone this repository on your local and walk through the smart contract as I'm doing it. Try to deploy it if you can, run the scripts as I'm running them. If you're not able to do it, that's okay, no worries, you can do it at your pace as well. But if you do it with me right now, it would help you give that lead, right? So I'm just going to the repo that we will be cloning and working with is the starter assembly script. So I'll be posting the link to this repo as well. Sheriff, who's the education head at NEAR, has been kind enough to prepare this starter kit, which also has a video. If you're interested, you can definitely later walk through this. But just to save some time, what we are going to do is we are going to directly jump into cloning this repo. So I'm going to be copying this link and I'm going to go to my terminal. I've already created a directory. Let me clone this repo. All right. So I've cloned this repo, and now you can see that I'm inside this repo. Let me bring this to the center of the screen so we are all being able to see this. So, all right. As you can see, I'm already inside the repo, and you can see that there is a README. There are some config files. There is the asconfig.json, which is a config file. Let's take a look at this. So it just has the name of the workspace, that is source sample. So there's a source, there's a yarn.log, which we don't have to worry about. The package.json, of course, it comes with the NPM, and there are some scripts which we'll go through soon, right? So let's dive into source. Before that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just open my VS Code so it becomes easier for all of us to see the code. So as mentioned in the repo here, we need to do yarn, which will install all the dependencies. And then if we want to run the tests, we can do a yarn test, right? So let me just do yarn. So it's going to be installing all the dependencies. As you can see, I already have the NEAR SDK AS and some of the other dependencies like the NEAR CLI installed. So this is going to install the this repo specific libraries for me. So let's go inside source and sample. Let's go inside assembly and you will find a file called index.ts. This is going to be your smart contract file, right? So you can see that once you go inside source, inside sample, which is the name of a folder. For example, if you have a project that is called coin toss demo, you're inside the source, you will create a folder called coin toss demo, inside which you will keep your tests as well as your assembly script contract, which is called index.ts in this case. Now, the next thing on our agenda, of course, was to just walk through this contract, right? So let's see what is there in this contract. As you can see, the first line is importing some libraries. So we are importing from the NEAR SDK AS, a couple of data structures, functionalities that we require to use in the contract. So we are going to import the context, which will provide context for the contract execution. As you can see here, it will have information about the transaction sender, about how much money was attached with that particular transaction, etc. Right? Then logging is of course used to print out some statements that we are, as you can see, one of the examples, something that we want to log, right, on the console. We can use logging for that. Storage is used to determine the storage related parameters for contract. So this represents the contract storage, right? And then persistent DQ. So what is persistent DQ? Let us take a look at this. It's a different type of collection that is built on top of the storage class exposed by the Near platform. You will find some other similar collections called persistent vector, persistent map, which you may need to use in your contract as you go, right? So what is this particular data structure that we are using? It's called persistent DQ. It implements queue, a persistent bidirectional queue, that is a double-ended queue or DQ. So you can see here that the syntax to create a DQ is let, then the name of the variable, new persistent DQ, and then what type of DQ do you want to create, a string type. And here we need to choose a unique prefix per account. Why do we need this prefix? As you can see in the node, since all the data that is stored on the blockchain, especially on the Near blockchain, is kept in a single key value store under the contract account. Therefore, to determine it uniquely or to access it uniquely, we must use a unique storage prefix for different collections to avoid the data collision. So if you're going to have another collection, for example, persistent vector in the same contract, you will need to pick another unique prefix to identify that particular collection, right? So you can go through this. There are different other collections as well, which you can go through. What are the functions related to this, the constructor, accessors, the different methods, etc. Right? So I'll put a link to this as well in the description box. Now, don't worry about learning all of this in one shot. As we walk through the contracts and write our own contract, we will get to learn more about what these mean, right? So let us, start going through this contract. This is the interesting bit that, we have come across. So the first function that you see in this contract is called show you know, right? It's a view function. That is, it does not alter the state, right? So what do you mean by altering the state? When we store some information on the blockchain, right? In the form of variables, when we are when we're declaring some variables in the contract, right? They have some kind of value associated with them. That is, they are in a particular state. So when we are writing and during write operations, we change the state of these variables. During read operations, we don't do, we just read the state of that variable. So this particular function called show you know is just a simple view function. That is, we are just printing a log statement here and we are not doing anything. So it's not returning anything. So you can see the return type void here. So let me just explain the syntax over here a little bit, and I'll just do that for one function. So you can see that the export keyword is used here to define this function. Function is the keyword, of course, to define the function itself. This is the name of the function. Here, if it takes any parameters, it will go inside the parenthesis, colon, and this is the return type. So we have our curly braces inside which the logic of the function will be written. If we write the keyword export next to it, that means this function can be accessed in an external file as well. Simple as that, right? Here, we are using our logging to log, saying that this particular function was called, show you know was called, right? Now we have another function called show you know 2, which is returning something. So you can see that the void has changed to bool. So this is again logging a statement saying this particular function was called and it returns true. Now, this is a function wherein we are printing something saying say hello, right? Sorry, we are printing that say hello, that is this particular function was called. And we are returning, instead of a bool, we are returning another type of parameter called string. right? So we are returning hello. So when this function say hello would be called, we'd be returning hello as a string, right? This again is a view function. We are not altering the state of any parameters in this function. Now here, what happens in this next function called say my name, right? In this function, we are returning a string, but what is the string that we are returning? We are returning hello, which is a static string populated by us, plus context.sender. If you remember, when I said that we'll be importing context from the near SDK, this will have all the information regarding the transaction. So context.sender will give us the account ID of the transaction sender. So as you can see that it will be printing hello context.sender and then an exclamation mark. So whoever calls this function, the account ID of that sender would be printed here. Let us see what is happening here, right? In the next function called save my name, right? In save my name, what we are doing is we are using the storage, right? Which is going to have the storage of the contract itself. This function will save the sender account name to the contract state. It's not returning anything, but it's going to store the context.sender, that is the sender account name, to the state belonging to that particular contract, right? So here we use the storage keyword. Now, if we see the next function, which is called save my message, right? This is a change function, that is, it is altering the state. It's not taking any, it takes a parameter called message, right? And then it returns something called, it returns a Boolean value. So you can see that the parameter name, colon, the type of the parameter is how the syntax for taking a parameter inside a function would work, right? So we have message, and then the type of the message is going to be a string. So what this, let's see what this function is doing. It is first printing out that this particular function was called. Here, assert is used to check something, right? If this particular condition results to false, then message, this statement would be printed. So it's checking if the message length is greater than 0. That is, some significant message has been sent. If not, it says that message cannot be blank, right? Now, it is creating a new persistent DQ, right? Called messages of type string. So here the prefix that they have chosen is messages. It is too long. It should actually just be like an M or something, right? But here the name of this persistent DQ, most important, is this messages. And what type of variable will this persistent DQ store? Strings. So all the messages we are storing in this persistent DQ called messages. We are creating a new one, right? In this, we are pushing to the front a new message that we are creating, right? Or rather, we are appending the message that the user has sent with the data of the user. That is, we are creating a new persistent DQ. In the persistent DQ, we are pushing context.sender, that is who's made this call, says added by us, and the message that they have sent. So who has sent what? That will be added to this particular persistent DQ called messages, right? It doesn't return, it returns once the action is over, it is meant to return true, right? So this seems to be a little misleading, but that's fine, right? We know what's happening in the function. Now, let us see the last function that is called get all messages, right? And it returns an array of string, right? Now we are storing, all of our strings in a persistent DQ. So why are we returning an array of strings? This might be a question. Now, assembly script by default supports arrays, right? But persistent DQ is a collection that has been created by Near for easily storing the key value pairs on blockchain, right? So that is why we need to take this collection, convert it into a string, and then we can see the values on the console properly. So you can see get all messages returns an array of strings. Of course, it logs get all messages was called. Then we create the persistent DQ, right? Called messages. So since it is persistent, it will of course have all the messages that have been sent by the sender in this previous call. And while it is not empty, it loops through the messages, DQ, right? It pops each of the messages and then pushes it in this new array called results that we have created. This is an array of strings. And once the results is populated with all the messages, we return this to see what are all the messages that we have. Now that we have gone through all the functionality of the contract, right? I want to show you another, So if you see this folder called scripts, you'll find two scripts inside this. The first one is one.init.sh. This is going to delete if any previous contract instances were there and set to the owner as a beneficial, right? So you can see the first thing it does is delete any older instances and cleans up the near dev folder. And then it will build the contract for us using yarn build release. And then it deploys the contract using near dev deploy. Now near dev deploy creates temporary account IDs for us, which the contract can be deployed. It is important to note that each account in near can hold only one contract, 1 or 0 contracts, but maximum it can hold one contract. Now, to avoid all the hassle of creating testnet accounts, etc., the dev deploy command automatically creates an account ID for us where this particular contract will be deployed. So our contract will be built as sample.wasm, the wasm file from assembly. And then this will be deployed onto the near blockchain. Not the mainnet, of course, the local net that we are working with using the CLI. We can also deploy it on testnet or wherever we would like to deploy it, of course, but we'll have to change certain parameters for that. So this is the first script that we'll be running to deploy the contract, right? So let's get started. So let me just increase this. So as I mentioned, missing contract environment variable, I have not set anything. Missing owner environment variable, I have not set anything, right? So I will be setting the owner to my testnet account, that is yarn.testnet, because my testnet account exists on this system, my testnet account keys. So I can set my testnet account as the owner. Another way to do this is to you can create your own testnet account. So if you go to wallet.testnet.near, you can create your own account. I have some, older login confirmation page that has just opened up. So it's an unknown some app that I was locally building. But you can see that the wallet.testnet.near.org, here automatically my testnet wallet has opened, but you can also create your own testnet wallet. You can create a new account once you go here and you will have your testnet. And you can use near login to actually log in to this particular testnet. And you can, like you saw the message which said give access to the unknown app. So give access to this particular app. And then also you can set the owner as your own testnet account ID. So the beautiful thing about Near is that you don't have to worry about remembering, huge long hexadecimal addresses. Your account ID can simply be whatever name you give, .testnet or .near for mainnet wallet. Super cool, right? So, all right. So as I said, let's look at how the deployment has happened. It has created a dummy account ID for us. That is this, right? And we can see that this is the node that it is connected to, the rpc.testnet.near.org. The transaction ID, we can even see the transaction, the Explorer if you're interested. And it is deployed to this particular testnet account. Now, it asks us to set the contract to this particular new ID, right? So it can get this for the next further deployments. I'm also going to go ahead and set myself as the owner, all right? So now that we have deployed the contract, you can see a couple of more things have happened, right? You can see that a sample.wasm file has been built. Then the near dev, there's a dev account that has been created. There are certain, so the contract name is in this account ID. And then there are certain other node modules that have been added, right? So something has happened. Now, the second script, what that something is deployment of the contract, right? That's what has happened. Now, the second script here can be used to call all of these functions that we were looking at in our contract, right? Using the CLI. So let's see what are, how are they calling these? This is going to be just to check if we have set the environment variables, which we have already set on our terminal just now. So here we are going to be calling the view functions, so which don't require a signature, the first three, right? So let us comment these out. So, right, 21, okay. So here we are going to be calling near view, right? This particular, the contract address, right? And then show right? And then all the three functions which are going to be printing from log, right? So the first function, show right? It says show was called and it doesn't return anything. The second one, show 2, right? It says show 2 was called and returns true, a Boolean value. The third, say hello, right? It just returns hello, right? A string. So let's run the script and see what happens. So you can see contract is set, owner is set. Now it is calling the first ever function, that is view call. First, so it returns false, right? Because it's returning void, it's not returning anything. Show was called, so it's printed. The second is show 2 was called, that is printed over here, right? And the third is say hello was called and hello is printed. So this one returns true, so true is printed. You can see how can you see what function was being called? You can see the name of the account ID that was created for us, the contract dot show that is the function name that was called, right? So all good so far. All of the view functions have been called. Now let's comment these out. And then 21, 26, and these, right? So let's see what these are doing. So a couple of our other names, other functions. So this is say my name, right? Let's go and see what this is doing. It's calling this function and it needs a context.sender. That is, who is calling this function is going to print that hello context.sender. So here we have sent an account ID called owner. Now the owner that I have set is gyan.testnet, that is my testnet account. The next is save my name. So the next, it just saves this particular context.sender, as you saw over here, in the storage, right? And the next function, the next two functions are about the persistent DQ, if you remember, right? So we are sending a message called hey again. You can see how the message is being sent from this particular account ID, that is owner. And we get all the messages for this particular account ID owner. So to make it a little interesting, let's send a couple of messages, right? Not just one. Hey, again, one maybe, and let's say, hey, back again. All right. So we're going to be sending a couple of messages and then we're going to be retrieving them back, right? So let's run the script now. All right, so the owner is set. Again, the contract is set. This is the first thing that's being echoed. Now say my name. So it should say who was the contract caller, right? So let's see what it prints. Okay, it says hello, Gyan.testnet, right? So I was the contract caller, context.sender printed Gyan.testnet. That is my account, right? Okay, here we are not returning anything, just storing it in the storage, right? In this function that is save my name. Now next is save my message, right? So this was successful. The first message was saved, hey again. So it sent me a true. Then I'm saving another message called hey again one. This is also true. Let's see what is the next message. That is hey back again. So this is also true. Now we have saved 3 messages in the persistent DQ, right? According to our functionality. Now we are getting all the messages that are there in the DQ. As you can see, it sends, it prints this particular context.sender says, hey again. Yarn.testnet says, hey again one. And the third message as well. So all of our messages we were able to successfully retrieve from the persistent DQ. So yeah, and just before we close, let's see one of the transactions in the Explorer as well, right? So here you can see that this is get all messages in contract, the contract account ID. Then you can see what was the result, the console log that was printed, right? You can see the different, the block in which it was executed, you know, what was, let's see, what was the gas burned, the tokens burned, who is the predecessor, what is the receipt, here is the block hash signed by the owner, the receiver, the status that it succeeded, etc. There's no deposit value associated with it. And you can see the transaction fee as well, which is extremely low, right? So yeah, I think, so we have gone through this entire contract. We have seen it in action.
So now that we have basically gone through the first step, that is walking through an entire contract. So you have understood, right? Like now, whenever we are creating any kind of application, we have some business use case in mind, right? Like create a decentralized voting app or create an application where you can upload something and people can vote. They can send you tips in cryptocurrencies, or you can create an application which is a small game, right? So these kind of different applications, the logic of that application can be written inside these entities called smart contracts. So as you have already gone through Solidity tutorial, am I right? Or you are familiar with smart contracts? You have had some sessions on that. If not, also don't worry. Smart contracts are nothing but your pieces of logic that you write, like how we write some code which is solving a particular problem. We write some logic for that. Similar to that, we have our smart contracts as well. So this entire smart contract that we went through is just a simple smart contract where it's showing you the different syntax on how to write the functions, how to return a variable, how to deploy a smart contract onto the blockchain, and how to run a particular smart contract and call the functionality, which is called smart contract interaction. So you can call a function from within the smart contract once you want to interact with the smart contract. Here, one tip that I had given in the chat as well is that the testnet ID that you're using, If you are not, you don't have to create it on the wallet. That's one of the ways to do it on the browser. But you can also use the testnet ID that you created as a part of the Figment walkthrough tutorial. So you can do that as well. And once you have that testnet ID, you can use that to deploy your contracts, because those credentials are generated on your system. So it will find the key store on your system, right, while signing. So that should be okay. Now the next step is basically you getting your hands dirty to write your own smart contract from the scratch. This entire series that I have with me is basically writing your own smart contracts and writing unit test cases for this. I need to stop sharing and reshare again. This part that I have, that is writing your own smart contracts, it's a bit longer. It's about 50 minutes odd. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it through and at least, so this consists of three things. One is writing your own smart contract from the scratch, deploying it on the testnet and then calling your functions, etc. And then going for writing unit test cases. We will not look at the unit test cases at all today because that's going to consume a bit more of time. And I will send you the ASPECT documentation where you can see how what are the different functionality of the unit test cases and how you can write it. We will do just the smart contracts alone, writing the smart contracts. If we have time, we can do the deployment. Otherwise, I have this course somewhere else as well, probably on YouTube. I'll have to check and I'll share the link with Kunwa sir. Maybe he can share it with the team, right? So let me share my screen. So by now, you know how an assembly script smart contract looks, right? So even if you don't have an editor, you don't have like a terminal or anything, just I would still encourage you to write these smart contracts along with me as I'm writing them on the screen. So you will get used to the pattern and the workflow, and later you can compile it, you can deploy it and do all of that. So just to give you an idea, what is happening is the smart contracts that we are writing, when we compile them, they get compiled to an extension called .wasm. So these are wasm files. Wasm files are WebAssembly files which can be deployed on chain so that it can be easy to interact with WASM files on chain. So that's why we deploy the smart contracts into WASM files. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to write a contract and then compile it and then deploy it. I would suggest you to write it along with me. We'll do the writing and the deployment part at the least, given the amount of time. The unit testing, we can probably take it later.
So the contract language of our choice is assembly script. Near contracts can be written in either assembly script or Rust, and we have chosen to go ahead with assembly script. So what are we going to build today? If you can see the image over here, you see the image of a roulette on your left and the roulette board on your right on which the betting happens. We are going to build a very simple contract. So if you see the even or the odd, right? So the user can bet X amount of money either on the even or the odd. And the roulette machine spins and the ball randomly lands on one of the numbers, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to replicate the even odd betting game in the form of a small smart contract. So what are we going to write? We would be writing a contract that would represent betting scenarios in the game of roulette, right? One of the betting scenarios rather. So we would create a game. Create a game initially, which would have some near. For example, that is the casino, right? Which has already put in some money. The user will bet for some amount of money on the smart contract, and the user will choose whether they want to bet on odd or whether they want to bet on even. The system or our contract will randomly generate a number, and based on whether it's even or odd, the user wins or loses. And of course, winner gets all the money. So let's get started. I'm going to be sharing my screen, which will have all right. So for those who missed the previous session, what we did was we cloned one repo called learn near the starter assembly script, right? So you can just click on this, copy this, and then go to your terminal, do a git clone, copy the repo, and it will get cloned, right? So since I have already cloned the repo, you can see that I am already inside the starter assembly script. It already has one contract, which we will be overwriting with our own contract. So I'm going to open this entire folder in VS Code. All right. So inside VS Code, if you see inside the source directory, and there is a sample directory inside which there's a test directory and an assembly directory. If you go inside the assemblies directory and click on index.ts, this is your smart contract. There is already a default smart contract with a couple of functions over here, right? Which is about sending a message, saving a message, and printing some information. This is the contract that we are going to overwrite. Now, I already have another contract that I had written earlier, right? Which is a similar game. So I'm going to copy this contract code as well and keep it with us. So, in case we do need any references, we can pick up from this contract, right? So let's get started with our contract. Okay, I'm going to leave the import as of now, right? And first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class, right? A class called roulette, right? This is the class that will hold all the necessary details of the game. So let us see. Okay, so let's say we have a player 1, right? And we are going to take the address of the player. So we are going to, of course, there's going to be only one player because the other player is going to be the system itself, that is us, right? So there's going to be a player, then there's going to be a guess. So maybe we can keep the guess as a U32, that is, or let's keep it as booth because it's going to be even or odd, right? So let's have a guess and then initial amount, right? This will be the amount that would be sent by us, right? That is the contract initially will hold some amount which will be sent by deploying the contract. So this is like the casino is giving some amount, right? And then bet amount. This is the amount that is being sent by the user, right? So let us have a constructor where we are going to have this dot player is equal to, there is something called context, which can have the account of the sender, right? So let's say context dot sender. This will store the player. So whenever a new game is created, right, we will say that or let us, yeah. So whoever is calling the new game, they will become the player, right? So this, and then this dot guess, let's just leave it at false now. Okay. So, okay, I think this should be the default. Okay, so I don't think this should be the player because the player will not be calling the constructor. We will be, when we initialize the game with some amount of money, we will be calling the constructor. So let's keep the player, let's not initialize the player for now, and neither the bet amount. So what we are going to do here is the initial guess, of course, we can choose to have it or not have it. But the initial amount is required to be populated. So here we have the context that we can take in from the Near SDK. So if you see the Near SDK, we can take the context from there, which will have the attached deposit. So when this contract is being called, the constructor is being called, there is a deposit that is attached with it that will act as the initial deposit for the game. So the initial deposit plus the bet amount will together become the final winning amount, right? So let's say that this dot player, we just say like none, this dot bet amount for now, we'll call it Z. All right. So the U28 is actually another data type that is present in the Near SDK, which can be used to define this can be used like a way sort of quantity. Like this can be used to take in the amount of Near, because all of the cryptos that you see are cryptocurrencies rather, they have X amount of decimals. And because of the number of decimals associated with them, the normal U32 or 16 or 32-bit, 64-bit are not able to hold that. That's why there is a U128 data type that can hold the amount of Near that is sent in as the deposit, right? So initially the bet amount is 0 and the player is, we have just put it as none, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a persistent vector, right, which will hold all the games. So I'm going to call it games, then new persistent vector of roulette, right? And then I'm going to give a prefix as we saw in the previous video as well, that we need to give a prefix to uniquely identify this particular data structure. So spelling mistake. Let's see if there is a syntax error. This is fine. And what we need to do is whenever we are creating a new class, if we want to export it outside of this file, we can add the export, and we also need to add the near bind gen in order to ensure serialization and deserialization. So you can see that it's a decorator used to make the classes serializable. All right. Sorry, I missed this. Okay. So now what we are going to do is we are going to define a function called create game, which will be created by us, right? And we are going to send in, let's say, what do we need? No, we don't need to send in anything. Let's call the constructor left, right? Now this, all right? So when we call this new roulette, the constructor of this class will be called, right? And it will take in the bet amount. It will set the player, the bet amount, the guess, as well as the initial amount, right? So, and now what we are going to do is we are going to take this persistent vector, right? Because we want to store all the games in this. And we are going to push this newly created game for roulette. There is one more thing that I want to do, that is I want to have an enum called game state, which will help me understand what is the state of the game. So I'm going to have a created a joined, that is when somebody joins a particular game, and then a game ended, right? So initially when we call the constructor, I'm also going to initialize a variable called game state, which is going to store the state of the game, right? So when we want to return the games that are available, that is number of games that have been created by the system, which are in created state, so that the users can join any of these games, right? So I'm going to say this dot game state is equal to game state dot created, right? So, all right, now the game is created, right? I'm going to export this. So we can use the export word if you want to call this function from any other file, right? So once the game is created, a user can join the game. But what do we need for the user to join the game? We need the user to give us a guess, right? So, all right, I suppose this should be Boolean. So, oh, there can be another interesting thing that we can do. That is, we can create a game ID for every game. So I'm just going to pick this random number generator, which we are going to be using again. So we can create a unique ID for the game. So you can see that the random number generator will generate anything between 1 and the max value of U32, right? And I need to import this RNG from Near SDK as well. Let me have an ID for the game. When we keep writing, we keep feeling like we need to add more and more information to the game, right? So the users will understand what is happening. So I'm going to add game ID is equal to, and here is a random number generator, which has generated a random number. So, all right. So what I can do actually here is in this create game, I can return a U32. What that would mean is I can return the game ID. So I'm going to roulette is my game dot game ID. All right. So I'll return the ID of the created game. All right. So here, what we are going to do is we are going to we're going to let the user join a game. Now the user can join a game by giving the game ID of the game, which game does the user want to join. And of course, because the user can join a game which has higher stakes or lower stakes, depending on the user's choice, right? Now the guess as well, right? What is the user betting on? And how do you think let's see, what we need to return later. How do you think now, we'll get the deposit from the user? If you remember this, right, the earlier, this context dot attach deposit, this is the same thing that we're going to use. So when the user is going to join a game, the user will be, the user will be able to send some near to this, which will act as the user's deposit. That is how much is the user betting for, right? So that we don't need to take as a parameter. Now, all right. Now, in order to retrieve the game directly using the ID, we can also create a persistent map. All right. So this can have a U32, that is the user ID itself, and okay. So we need to here. So now that we have a persistent map, we may actually not really use a persistent vector. Let's see if we have the use case. So here we are going to set the value of this persistent map. So the key is going to be the roulette.game ID. So for this particular key, what is going to be the value? The roulette itself, right? So we have a U32, a roulette, okay? So let us just comment out the persistent vector. All right. So now what do we need from here? We have the game ID. So we need the game itself, right? So I'm going to say game is equal to, and I'm going to call the persistent vector dot get or get sum. I'm going to say, given this game ID, give me that game, right? Now I'm going to say that the game dot guess, right, is equal to the guess that has been given by the user, right? And the game dot bet amount is also something that we need to update, right? So now we are going to say context dot attach deposit. How much did the user send, right? Now that we have this, what we need to do is we need to again set the game in the game map, right? We need to update this. So what we are going to do is we are going to say set, and we are going to use the game ID key, comma, the updated game, right? Because we have changed some value. So again, we need to set the key, right? Sets the new value for the key, right? All right. So now we have joined the game. What next? Of course, the next thing is to end the game and declare the results, right? So let us see. We of course need the game ID, not to forget that. All right. Let's get the game as well. Game ID. All right. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to again take our random number generator, right, and generate a random number. Okay, now here is an interesting thing, right? So we can either generate a random number between 1 to u32.max value, or we can go back to the roulette, right, and see what is the maximum number in the roulette. The maximum number in the roulette is 36. So why don't we try to generate a number between 1 and 36, right? So let's try this. All right. Okay, now, so we have our random number. Now our a random number, or let's call it the winning number, right? So winning number percentage 2 equal to 1. That is, the winning number is odd, right? So let's have const var is equal to okay, let's try to check here. So the winning number is odd, right? So if the winning number is odd, then if the user, okay, let's keep the Boolean as 1 for odd and 0 for even, right? So if the user has guessed 1, right, then the user wins in this case, otherwise the system wins, right? Should we also have a winner, right? Yeah, we should. So here the winner, let it be the context dot sender by default, right? That is us, I mean the game itself, right? So we need to check if the game dot guess is equal to true. Then okay, so let's do this, right? If the game dot guess was false, then we change the winner, right? Otherwise, we let the winner be. Oh, so we didn't set the player, right? When we when the player joined the game. So that also we need to do. Right? It will be context dot sender, whoever decided to join the game. Right? So now game dot winner would be game dot player. As nothing. Okay? So if the number that we generated is even, right? And if the guess is true, then the game dot winner will be the game dot player. In the other case, as we have already said the winner to be the contract itself, that should be fine. Okay? So let's update the game map dot set the game ID and the latest game updates, right? Now, what we will also do in the end game is that we will transfer all of the money to the winner, right? That needs to be done. So how are we going to do that? Let us take the help of this previous contract, right? I'm just going to, yep. All right, I'm going to copy this. I will explain this code in just a bit. This login is not necessary. All right. So what we are going to do is we are going to doing a cross contract call. So this is another contract called contract promise batch, right? Which is going to wrap the game winner in such a way that the game winner can become a beneficiary to whom we can send the money, right? Now, where do we get this? We will get this from the SDK, I suppose. Yes, so it's present in the SDK. So since we are not using the persistent vector, let us remove this, maybe make this. So you can make this as short as possible, right? To save your memory space for easy access as well. What we are going to do here is, okay, all right. So now the two beneficiary is the one to whom all the money will go, right? So the game winner, whoever has been set, will be sent all the money. Now, how much money do we need to send? We need to send an addition of the game bet amount that was sent by the user plus the initial amount that was created for this particular game. So we add both of these and then we just want to return the winner. Now this transfer function will transfer the addition of these two, that is the total amount, to the beneficiary. The beneficiary is nothing but the winner whom we have created here, right? Now here we are just returning the game.winner. So here we need to ensure that we're able to return something. So we are going to be returning the string. All right. So the rest of the contract we can happily delete because we are not going to be using. All right, voila. So our contract is done here. Now, in the next video, what we are going to do is we will be running this contract using the scripts that are present under the scripts folder. And then we will be seeing how to call the different functions and see the contract in action, right? And post along with that, we'll also learn to write some small tests for this particular contract. So yeah, thanks a ton for joining me today, folks, on this particular video. Hope you were also writing the contract with me and kind of understood the nuances of writing a smart contract in assembly script. And in the next video, we will see how to run this contract and how to call the different functionalities of this contract, right? So thank you once again for joining me. If you like this video, please don't forget to press the like button, hit the like button, and subscribe to my channel. Ciao. We have already written the contract. Let's move to the contract itself, right? So I'm going to share my contract, my entire screen. So here is the contract that we wrote last time. Just to quickly walk through the contract, we have a class called Roulette, which is the game itself. We can create multiple games. When we create the game, the workflow would be something like this. We create a game and put in some initial amount of money, which is called initial amount.
All right. So at the chow, I think we were done with almost most part of the contract. You are already aware of how to write it and how to write the different functions. As we are there almost at the end of the session, we have about 10, 11 minutes left, 10 minutes left. So instead of going through the whole deployment process, which will, and then the unit testing process, which would take at least about 20 to 30 minutes, maybe I would like to take this time to kind of um, open up for any Q&A or anything that you are intrigued about Near protocol or blockchain in general. You have any questions? I'm happy to take up any of those with the remaining time that we have. I think that would probably be more productive than kind of walking through the whole process of deployment, which you are already familiar with. You just need to take this contract and then polish it a little bit if you could, and then kind of, be able to deploy it on the testnet. So, are there any questions? Is there anything that you would like to ask me? Or I'll also put down my email ID if you have any ideas that you want to build on eventually. You can connect with me on my email as well. Let me just, yeah. So, um, yeah, if you have any questions, do let me know. I'm open for Q&A.
Any questions?
All right. Seems like, yeah, I mean, if you're writing the smart contracts for the first time or you're working with any layer one for the first time, it might be a bit overwhelming. That's completely okay. You have like a lot of time to catch up. But if you are able to write smart contracts now, you're able to build logic now. You are one of the early adopters of this technology, so you're obviously going to benefit from that. You will also learn the nitty-gritties of how money when it is native to a particular chain, how would that work? How do you move around the money? How do you make smart contract calls? All of these now is a great time to learn because the technology is evolving. You get a lot of incentives to work on certain things. You are encouraged to work on it because your feedback matters to the people who are building right now. So I would factor in all of this, and I would encourage you folks to go ahead, learn to develop smart contracts, test it out, create your testnet accounts, and have fun with the whole thing. Sir, I would also like to send out some incentives to the participants who attended the event. So if you are able to send me like a list or just like the names, I will create something called Near Names and share it with you, and you can share it with them over email. Would that work?
Oh, okay. So just you need the names or you need the names and mail ID?
No, yeah, so if you give me the email IDs, I can send it to them directly. But
Okay.
if it's a privacy issue, then I can send it to you and you can send it to them, whatever works
Okay.
best.
Okay. We'll send both name and mail ID. We'll send it.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
I have
was
one last.
an interesting session. We could learn from the basics of the near protocol. So my one query is some time back we were learning about Hyperledger, which is a permissioned blockchain system. This
Yes.
is also similar to that with
No,
permission or
this
not?
is permission.
This permission is required.
No, no permission, permissionless. So these are all public blockchains, which I covered in the first half, that we are focusing on public. I mean, Ethereum, Near, Eternity, Algorand, these are all public blockchains.
Okay. For if anybody wants to acquire this for an industrial application, is there anybody using this for general application other than this game and money related things for any process industry or anybody who is using it? Is there any use case available with you?
So at the moment, not that I know of, but there is one team that I am mentoring that is working on a supply chain use case for MSMEs, and they would be implementing Near. So once they have some kind of POC ready, I will be happy to share that details with you.
Okay. If we have any thing as a project, is there anybody to take it up and then whether it is feasible and to use it in the industrial environment other than this Bitcoin and
Yeah, it is.
cryptocurrencies?
So any layer one is for any kind of application, supply chain, DeFi, healthcare, it can be used across various industries. So what I can share is I have, I'll share that with Kumar over email. There is a Discord link for the Near group itself. So if you have a use case in mind, say for example, healthcare or supply chain, fintech, of course, fintech, a lot of use cases already exist. Then any other industry, maybe ed tech, even education is becoming one of the popular industries where blockchain is being used. So any of the industry use cases, if you have in mind, you can discuss over there as well in the Near Discord. The Near engineers themselves or people from the community will help you refine the use case and understand whether blockchain is the right technology for that use case or not, and if Near can be used. So any layer one public blockchain can be used in any use case. There is no bar on the use case.
Okay, thank you. Then you can give the details so that if
Yeah, I'll share.
we can think of using it. I am not a programmer. I am just a user. That's why I want to use and see in my manufacturing sector.
Oh, sure.
I couldn't see any things in the web. It's all healthcare and pin shots and other things.
So one of the things with the manufacturing sector, as we know of today, is the first step, that is digitization. So that step itself is a bit of a leap in the manufacturing sector. But if you feel like digitization is one thing that you can achieve, then it would definitely blockchain would be the next step for sure. But
Yes.
you are seeing slow use cases in the manufacturing because of the digitization. It is very difficult to digitize physical products straightforward because manufacturing is very closely associated with physical products. So the digitization of that takes a little bit of time. How do you create a digital imprint of a physical product? So once you are through that problem, then you are able to implement the next level of technologies like your advanced AI or blockchain, etc.
Yes,
So
that's what I was also thinking. If any raw material is available from the supplier and if it goes till the end of the manufacturing, the end user should know it is a genuine material and it's from a reputed company. The material has come.
Yes.
So that is the manufacturing industry's present assurance which we have to give it to the customers.
Yes, some kind of similar solutions are coming up, but it's not entirely available. Why you don't find so many solutions is because manufacturing has too many touch points. Like the whole life cycle has too many different things you interact with. And if you say blockchain, you are directly looking at something that is already digitized. So you need to ensure that every element you're interacting with is digitized, which is little difficult in a manufacturing sector because there are too many elements. So when you're thinking of digitizing everything, starting from your ledger book to your audit to your transport to your some of the things are still today not digitized, right? In India we use trucks for transport, the logistics industry is not digitized. So as we slowly move to digitizing the different components of the industry, then you can put it all together. Then you may see more use cases coming up for sure. Now there are certain use cases, but they are very, very minimal because the digitization is required at every single level. Even if at one point you don't have any digital connect, but you have only physical evidence, it becomes difficult to track it on chain. You can't track it on chain, physical evidence. So that is one of the problems. But yeah, hopefully, as we are all moving towards digitization, this time is not far away for sure.
If somebody has to run this, what will be the cost involved in this? A simple used case for a logistics or a healthcare. Somebody approximate.
At the moment, I am not entirely sure because I think, see, so from a blockchain perspective, you are just going to build an application. So that's going to be your standard, how much ever you invest in building a software application, which is not at all much. The rest of the things probably is the operational cost, the logistics cost that is involved, about which I do not have much idea, but I can definitely consult with some folks who are in the logistics space and are probably already looking at blockchain solutions. So they might be able to provide some better numbers, I suppose. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Lakshmi, that one last question.
Yes, sir.
Same thing can be done with the Ethereum. So what is the advantage of near blockchain over the Ethereum?
Sir, so there are several advantages. One of them is, of course, your transaction speed, the time which it takes for the blocks to finalize. In Ethereum, at the moment, the block finalization time is like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, depending on the network congestion. But here you can achieve block finality within 2 to 3 seconds. And another most important thing for users is the gas price. In Ethereum right now, you would be paying anything from $10 to $100 for a user to interact with a smart contract. That is, you're calling a function. Just to do that, you would be paying this much gas price. Whereas in Near, you will be paying like hardly anything less than $0.01 as gas price. So I had done one in the first hands-on session. I had done that where I transferred one Near, which was a call over the chain. So that requires some gas price. And you could see that it was something 0.01 Near or something, the gas price. So it's very, very minimal. So users don't have to pay so much to interact with the chain. That's one of the advantages of the Near, primary advantages of Near, because of which people are now starting to use this a lot.
I'm Ramchandran again. In case one thing which I think, if we have a Tanjavur paintings which is made at our Tamil Nadu, and if you want to put it in this blockchain so that people can have the authentication where it comes from, and so that when we sell it, we can give a geographical index GI to that, and we assure that it is from Tanjavur. For that,
Yes.
who has created that and where it was originated, and those things can be put in a blockchain and use it.
Yes. Yes,
So,
that is one exact project that one of the teams that I'm mentoring is working on. So they are an up and coming project called Naksh, and they are working on building Indian artisans on blockchain by creating NFTs out of their work. So like you're saying, Tanjore paintings, there'll be
if somebody has to implement that, what will be the requirements? You should have a digitized form when the product is completed, and that can be
Yes,
tracked
yes.
wherever it goes.
Yes, yes. So, what they are doing, this team, they are doing this exact same project actually. What they are doing is they are creating so they are working with different smaller communities across India, and they are working with building digital copies of their work. So, if you see like they have some that the embroidery work that they do, or very delicate paintings that they do, or some artwork that they do, which is very unique to that part of India. They are working on setting up a team that will create digital versions of this. So, sorry, excuse me. Digital versions can be created by two ways. One is the artists themselves, they know how to create a digital version. Now, in case of Tanjore paintings, the artists themselves don't know how to create the digital version, and the digital version is not the original version. But the digital version can be created by either taking like that design, or even a picture of the design. If you have a high quality picture of the design, that becomes a digital version of that product. Now on that you embed information as to who is the artist, who is the original artist, who where was this product originated, more information about the product itself. And then what they are doing is they are embedding some kind of QR code. So you scan the QR code and you are able to get the entire story of that particular product. And you can also buy that NFT digitally. You can buy a digital copy and you can redeem it for the physical copy itself. So they are selling the NFTs, that is the digital copy, and some of the NFTs they make them redeemable. Like you can redeem it for the original Tanjore paintings, like that. So
That NFT, then they have to send it to the traditional person. Then he will give the physical version of that. Correct?
yes, yes. So they buy the NFTs from the marketplace, they buy the digital copies, and then there is like some sort of QR code or something that is associated with that. They can redeem that particular digital image for the actual physical image by paying some extra charges, maybe shipping charges or whatever, international shipping charges, etc. And what they are planning to do is like on the Tanjore painting, maybe back of the painting or something, they are planning to have the same QR code. So the owner, the story of that, the owner who, the painter who painted it, the story behind it, and then what kind of painting it is, all those details can be matched with the NFT that you have already bought. So that's something they are planning, that particular team. Yeah. So this kind of projects are already kickstarting in India itself.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Lakshmi, for such a nice lecture. Yeah,
Thank
it's
you, sir.
I'm very happy that our own student gave such a lecture on the new technology near
Thank you.
blockchain. So, okay, thank you, Lakshmi.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah.
Your flow was so nice. So you enjoyed your way of creating a physical near programming, and you enjoyed it, and we also enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for attending. Yeah. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.